Randy, thank you so much for joining us. As we start, can you maybe say a few words about your current position? What's under your purview?
Sure. So I'm Chief Information Security Officer at Veterans United Home Loans. We're a VA loan origination company, so we focus and really specifically target helping veteran heroes get into houses. That's our mission. My perspective, or my scope of what I have, is anything information security, cybersecurity related. I have complete view over that. I don't have physical security anymore, but I do have all of the information side of that.
Mm-hmm. I understand. So that kind of paints the picture, like the point in the graph. But where did you start? What was the beginning of the journey?
Sure. So I've always been in the technical side of the role. Whenever I got here, started out, was the first person to really focus on security. We had about 540 employees whenever I started. We're just a little under 5,000 now, and that's been in about 11, 12 years. And we've kind of been about the same amount over the last couple of years. We did grow a bunch during COVID. So that was a lot of what we've dealt with is growth and continuing to improve our security posture. Whenever I got here, we were in the process of migrating to some things that made us more secure. And so we've just continued to focus on gap assessment. What's the next thing that is the biggest bang for our buck that improves the level of security, and always with a view towards having security be part of the innovation process. We have a mantra that I came up with is we want to be the Department of No, K-N-O-W, not N-O. So we don't want to be telling people, no, you can't do it. It's help us understand what you want to do. And if the more we know about it, the more we can help you do it securely. And that's been a really big facilitator for us. And we've avoided any animosity between our teams and production teams or anybody else. Is we're seen as a partner to help things go faster. And that's a good place to be.
I think it's amazing because I think we're a lot of CISOs and cybersecurity executives in general, where sometimes they have certain issues, I guess, with the rest of the org. To your point, is that they're so focused on, they see their mandate on keeping things secure, but now it's apparent that you cannot do that without wearing a business hat.
Right.
In addition to your responsibilities to keep information safe, employee records, customer records, et cetera, et cetera. It's interesting. Like, I think it's a change in perspective, and I think it's certainly a path that a lot of CISOs need to look into as they're looking to grow, as they're looking to get access to the board, potentially maybe getting board seats, and I think the wind is in our sails, because I think cybersecurity in general is just so much more top of mind for all business leaders, not just cybersecurity professionals or cybersecurity executives, but also functional leaders across the organization, whether it's CFOs or legal. Cybersecurity touches all those functions as well, all the way to COOs, presidents, CEOs, and the board and investors. I think it's a little bit less of an uphill battle now, because a lot more people understand at least the business implications of, I don't know, a breach or sensitive records being exposed, or I don't know, ransomware attack, where the whole organization is bricked for, I don't know, days or weeks.
Yeah, it's no longer a matter of educating people about the importance of cybersecurity, because I think most people get that. The gradation or the striations of what's important, the difference between a manufacturing facility that has very little, if any, customer data, they've got a lot of intellectual property, and maybe they got PLCs and that sort of thing that control the operations, but that's going to be very different looking than someone that's in the role that we are, for example, where in order to make a decision on whether a person is creditworthy, we have to gather a lot of data, a lot of documents that have financial implications on them. And we have an obligation then to keep that data secure, very different than what that manufacturing floor looks like. But no longer do we have to begin the conversation with, well, here's the why. Because to your point, publicly traded companies also have obligations to have someone that is cybersecurity aware on their board, but private companies also have that same, it may not be called out on them, but everybody understands. If you don't have a good program and are not a good custodian of data, you're going to lose public perception, public confidence, and people will go somewhere else. There's so many different options in almost every environment today that no one has to continue to do business with a singular entity if that entity is not protecting the data well. And so you have options, and that's where, as cybersecurity leaders, we've got to be better at understanding. We don't need to do the basic education. What we really need to do is educate ourselves on what the business does, so that we can be part of the innovation process, understand we're going to take some risks. The business is about risk management. So how do we participate in that risk management conversation appropriately? Helping people understand that we are knowledgeable. We have an understanding of what the business is trying to do. We're willing to acknowledge that if everything's a number one priority, then nothing's a number one priority. So how do you truly prioritize and help people understand this is something that we really need to take seriously? These other things we'll get to. They may come up at another point in time. We're not going to fix it all overnight because we didn't get here overnight. How do we prioritize the work that we're doing, prioritize the budgeting of that, and understand just because someone doesn't agree that our project is number one doesn't mean they don't take security seriously. It means that from a prioritization perspective, there are other things that are either opportunities or threats that we're not seeing in the same perspective. And how do we come alongside those other business leaders and talk about their concerns and help them meet their objectives and business goals, as well as what we want to do, express ours at the same time. But that takes a relationship. It takes getting to know people. You can't just sit in your office all day and expect people to come to you because there's a security concern. You've got to be expressing what the concerns are, having conversations with people that help them understand, their concerns, you also want to know your concerns, and how do you phrase it in the right way to help people get the actual problem that you're trying to solve.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think in the same vein, in addition to being kind of a co-pilot for the business leader, not the Department of No, KNOW, not Department of No, NO. I think it's also, for some CISOs, could be they could take another perspective, which is push back a little and question some of the thinking and some of the positions of the business leaders. I'll give you an example, maybe it's tangential, but as you probably know, I've been to a dentist office, small operation, 20 people. I'm filling the form. One of the fields is social security number. Why? And I mean, I understand the credit card, understand the ID, and I understand the insurance information, but my first reaction was I didn't fill this field, but my first reaction was I want to see your backup. I want to see what patches are being implemented. I want to talk to the person responsible for cybersecurity, and I'm sure they have none. So it's almost like, and it's kind of reminds me of some of the government organizations that just ask everything. They slurp all the data and then do nothing about securing it. So it's almost on a responsibility of cybersecurity executives, like, why do we need to collect this?
Right.
Is it just in case? Do we actually need this information?
Right.
Or are we going to be spending way more money protecting it than the business outcome of this information that we might need just in case, potentially exposing us to a much larger liability than the benefit of that any business use case can present?
And you bring up a couple of good points there. First, is there an actual business case for having this data? And maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Maybe it was, but now it's not anymore. But the second aspect with that is you can't breach data that you don't have. So sometimes we've just gotten in the habit of collecting data, and maybe we do need it for a certain business process, but then once that process is finished, we don't either have good processes or any view towards minimization of the data that we have, especially data that is known to be more of a liability than an asset. We just had a records retention conversation the other day, and I thought it was really interesting to hear one of our marketing executives talk about data that he viewed as potential asset data and data that would be potential liability data. And so when you think of it from that standpoint, it's like, okay, well, let's minimize the liabilities, those data pieces that we don't need, that we're not going to use past a certain point in the business process. Let's minimize the accumulation and the storage of those pieces of data. And then for the data that we really would truly consider an asset, let's make sure that we're evaluating the data fields that are there, protecting those that need to be protected at the appropriate level, and understand that some data probably doesn't need to be protected at the same level. And so we can differentiate what fields are encrypted, what fields might have more process around them, where does least privilege access come in, but think differentiatedly about data fields and what we're keeping, instead of just say, well, let's keep it all forever, because that's not a good sane policy for managing data. Your data storage needs are going to balloon out of proportion over time. And that's just not a good long-term strategy. It doesn't feel like to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's what you mentioned, to have a conversation with a business leader, whether it's marketing or finance, and have a conversation around data, which data is an asset, data is a liability. I think it's phenomenal, because it brings to the it brings this conversation, this understanding, that the question by itself calibrates their thinking in terms of, oh, I don't realize storing is not free. Oh, I don't realize protecting is not free.
Right.
And oh, I don't realize that even though there might be some edge case, business case for leveraging this data down the line, but the potential liability of getting exposed is 10x, 100x larger, so it's not worth it.
Yeah.
But the fact that business leaders at least understand the implications and can have a meaningful conversation about this now, I think it's a major step forward and a major sign of progress, that people just understand the implications of storing data that's personal, whether it's personally identifiable or sensitive.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that's an interesting kind of a sidebar to that, but it directly impacts it, is when you think about sometimes our cyber leaders are maybe some of the more experienced leaders, might even go so far as to say the most senior leaders in the organization, doing their job for a long time, and they're talking with younger leaders who are very excited about possibilities and other things that might be happening, and we think about things differently. But I ran across some data the other day that a guy was talking about how to really effectively communicate across generations and how to connect across the generations, of really three aspects of connecting from a standpoint of humility, respect, and curiosity, of recognizing we need to approach things and say it as if I'm right and confident, but listen as if maybe I'm wrong, and listen for other perspectives, and then be respectful as we're talking with people of, the old seasoned grizzled security veteran that's seen it all. Yeah, they probably want the younger people to respect them for their perspective, but the younger people also want respect of, hey, I'm thinking differently about this. I'm not discounting what you're talking about, but I'm seeing a different view of what's possible. And sometimes we tend to lose that part on the cybersecurity side, and we fail to think from a curiosity perspective. Help me understand, bring me along. I want to see your perspective, and I want to try, again, how can I know about what you're doing to help you do it? Be part of the innovation process. If cyber leaders really approached conversations with those three perspectives of humility, respect, and curiosity, the conversation completely shifts gears, and it changes the complexity of it in such a way that you now are having meaningful conversation. It's not just you come away and you feel like, wow, I could have just been in the room talking to myself because nobody was listening, or you've rambled on for 3-5 minutes and nobody else is really following the flow of the process and the flow of the conversation.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think having this humility and empathy goes a long way. And I think it's a good segue to the next question, which is, I think in the industry, everyone is talking about the shortage of talent, both at C-level, mid-level, individual contributors. And at the same time, you hear about massive layoffs, at least in the technology space, in some of the unicorn startups. So it's almost, it's a curious case where on the one hand, there's all those recs for open positions that are not being filled, and on the other hand, there are people kind of losing their jobs. What are your thoughts on how to solve this talent for problem for talent? Are you more of a proponent of finding people internally who have the aptitude and curiosity and and bringing them up and getting them ready, or are you more of a proponent of hiring from outside of the organization? What are your thoughts on kind of bridging this talent gap that a lot of companies are experiencing right now?
Yeah, so I'll answer that a couple different ways. Last year, ISC Squared released a study that said there were a little north of 400,000 open jobs in cybersecurity. And then at the same time, there was a survey that said that 32% of all CISOs last year considered quitting. And I just read an article last week on LinkedIn that said upper 40% of all cyber professionals, not just CISOs, but all professionals, were feeling like they were getting close to burned out or considering a role change because of the stress and that sort of thing. So we've got to think about that aspect in addition to the number of layoffs, because not only do we have layoffs that are happening, we also have baby boomers retiring at a rate of about 10,000 a day. And so we're losing both individual contributor workers and we're losing leaders, and a ton of depth of leadership and technical competency and that sort of thing. So as you think about what that looks like to recruit, a couple things come to mind. For our industry right now, mortgage origination, this is not a really great year for us. It's been a tough year. Rising interest rates, low home inventory, the rising cost of homes has really negatively impacted our industry right now. And so we're working through that and fighting through that, as well as many other people in our industry. But we're then looking at hiring from a standpoint of how can we have cybersecurity be part of a career path for our employees? What does that look like, whether they're technical employees or non-technical employees? Because in my scope of what I supervise, we've got people that do a lot of non-technical work, whether that is first-party risk management, third-party risk management, IT audit, policy work. Those are way less technical roles, and yet just as important now. When you look at almost all of our regulations are asking us how we're running through things through risk assessments. We need people that understand business and risk assessment. So how do you recruit and find those people? And again, we're looking internally mostly, but even if you were to look externally, I would look for somebody that has 4 characteristics. They're ambitious, they have a neutral self-image, they have exceeding curiosity, and they're willing to be bad before they're good. Spells the word anew, A-N-E-W. That's not original to me, but it's something that we've adopted, and that's motivation. If I can find somebody that, from a technical perspective, loves to eat, breathe, and live cybersecurity, they're motivated. I don't really have to do anything other than point them in the right direction. In the reality of a lot of the situations, if I recruited your best technician, I'm going to have to retrain them on the tool set that we have. The likelihood our tool set matches yours is probably 0, and the overlap might be less than 50%. And so I'm going to have to teach new tools. Now, if I don't have to teach the mindset, if I can have somebody that thinks like a hacker, that thinks about mostly abuse case scenarios, how could this be potentially abused? What could go wrong here? That's the mindset. If we can really get people thinking that way, it's huge. We can plug them into any system. Now, the challenge that we run into is we're really pretty good as an industry in general about recruiting people with the right technical mindset. But what happens with that then is when we begin to recruit leadership from within that technical realm, because we often also want to promote within the company from a leadership perspective, is we've selected people that are very deep technically, but emotional intelligence or EQ wise, they might not have the highest levels of EQ. And when you move into a leadership role, particularly people leadership, the single, in my opinion, and it's backed up by a couple different studies, the single most important factor for success in a people leadership role is level of emotional intelligence. Mm-hmm. Good part is you can learn that. You mentioned the word empathy just a few minutes ago. Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management, those are key components of emotional intelligence. we can teach people that. At the same time, we haven't historically had development programs where we teach that. We're starting to see some coaching opportunities come up to where people can work with a coach to develop those EQ skills, so that they all of a sudden they're not making incremental progress, they're making like jumps of progress and being able to understand themselves and other people. So those are some things that I think as we look internally to recruit, we're looking for people that already have those emotional intelligence skills as much as we can, because they are way more successful in helping us advance our programs. And that doesn't matter whether you're looking internal or external, really.
It makes a lot of sense, because I think if you hire based on technical skills and technical skills only, it's like, it's maybe a generalization and too broad of a generalization, that some people are more comfortable with computers and some people are more comfortable with other people. But maybe if you do hire on technical skills alone, you pigeonhole yourself because you have amazing individual contributors, but as senior leadership is transitioning out for one reason or another, these people may or may not be interested in this additional training and in picking up the EQ skills, right? So, and kind of stepping out of the individual contributor role and more into manager, senior manager, and senior leader down the line. So it's almost from the get-go, you need to focus both. Yes, you need to have technical skills, but also you need to work as part of the team and maybe as a team lead on some of those things, and over the career trajectory, just create opportunities to develop, not just on the technical aspect of someone's skill set, but also on the EQ side of it as well.
Well, and it needs to be a both and. You need people leaders. Fortunately, I think the word's fortunately, you don't need as many people leaders as you do individual contributors, but you also need individual contributors that are deep technically, and having the conversation with those people to ask, do you want to lead people or do you want to be a deep technician? And not put them in a role where they're going to be unsuccessful. If the only way to get a promotion and a raise is to move into people leadership and you're a very solid technician, that might not be the right role. You might move there and find that you're unsuccessful and you really dislike your job and your role. And it was because leadership didn't help you find the right spot.
Well, it's kind of like, I think back in the day, it used to be called Peter's principle, that people get promoted until the point where they reach their plateau of incompetence, and that's where they stay. But I think the most recent, it's like from 20 years ago, but the most recent example, I think, is in Twitter, where after the acquisition, they realized that there were dozens, if not hundreds, of developers who they didn't have a code commit in like months, if not years, because they were told to grow in your career, you need to manage people, and managers don't write code, which basically kind of creates this bloated organization that really doesn't, from the business perspective, doesn't make a lot of sense. But again, it's just mismanaging the incentives. I want to double click on something that you said, because I think it's extremely interesting. And so you mentioned the study that a lot of CISOs and cybersecurity professionals are under serious stress. They're burned out and they're considering a career change. I always felt that it's kind of a little bit unfair, because the main objective of a cybersecurity organization is to keep things safe, which means if things are in steady state and everything goes well, then VP of sales takes the credit, or the CEO or the board. Yes, we did it. It's an amazing year. Now realizing that the company someone was poking around looking for an open port 10,000 times a day, and it's really the CISO who enabled that success. But if you, on the flip side of it, it's if there is a breach or there is an incident, like all eyes are on CISO. So it's always, you get all of the blame and none of the credit. And so that's kind of one perspective, kind of broadly. But more recently, I'm hearing kind of stories that maybe because of the lack of, again, a lot of boards and a lot of C-level executives are understanding of the cybersecurity risks. But again, they're balancing a lot of different things at the same time. They have a lot of balls in the air. I'm almost hearing that especially companies that feel the slowing in the economic environment. They feel kind of the bottom is a little bit falling out, especially some of the venture funded startups that really kind of ramped up rapidly. The purse strings and the resources are being pulled back. So essentially, you're the CISO, you get half the budget, but double the responsibilities, and so it becomes almost a fool's errand of sorts. So we don't give you sufficient resources, but we expect you to provide same level of safety and same level of service, if you wish, as before, which really becomes untenable from a career perspective. And from, again, it amplifies the stress, which is high as a baseline, but given the circumstances, it just makes it impossible. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I may be of a different mind than some people are on this. I know the saying of, who's the last one to know when a junior developer rolls an unsecure product out to production and gets the system compromised? The CISO. Who's the first one to get fired whenever a junior developer does that? Well, the CISO. Well, maybe, okay. I would take the approach of kind of going back to even some of our conversation a minute ago, how, as a CISO, how am I developing relationships with other business leaders to help them understand security is everyone's business? A junior developer rolling production code to a public-facing system has a level of responsibility that we need to communicate with them. There's a gravity to that. And the more we can get people understanding their particular part of the role of cybersecurity, the better we're all going to end up being, because now all of a sudden it is everyone's responsibility. The other part that happens a lot of times as technicians, we like to be the subject matter expert and we like to be the solution. And so we put ourselves in a no-win situation over the long term that we don't recognize at first. But when we are the bottleneck, or when we're the one that knows, now all of a sudden everybody has to come to us. The downside is everyone has to come through us. And if there's a failure, oh, it must be your failure, not mine. Because if it was mine, you would have told me, because you always tell me whenever I mess up. And so if we can really begin to help people understand two things. One is everything is about risk management, and we're never going to have a completely secure system. There's always layers of risk. There's always different degrees of risk that we have to think about. And if the second part is we can begin to have those conversations around risk with our business partners, our internal business partners, of let's talk about it from that standpoint. Hey, this feels risky to me, and here's why I'm thinking that. How are you seeing that? And have the business partner echo back, oh, I'm not worried about that at all, because I didn't tell you about blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, I didn't know you had that control in place also. Thanks for sharing that with me. I feel better about that as well. Or wait a minute, you realize that's still not addressing this current attack methodology that we see, whether that's from MITRE ATT&CK framework, something in the news, whatever. Here's more specifically what I'm concerned with. How can we work together to minimize this, put some layers of control in place? Because it might be that business partner says, well, what if we just did this? Oh yeah, that will reduce that risk 70, 80%. Probably an estimate at that point. But is that enough? Is 70 to 80% of a risk reduction enough that you can now move on to a different conversation? When we begin to think about it from that standpoint, and we have those levels of conversations with our internal business partners, the picture looks very different, and the stress levels can come down, because now someone else is also, maybe you transferred the risk and the stress to them, but at least there's someone else there with you thinking about it. And communication on a regular basis, especially when you're thinking about people in public entities where there's somebody that's cyber aware on the board, having conversations with that person or persons outside of the board meeting, really, really valuable. Asking them what they would be concerned with. What would they be concerned with if they were in my shoes? What is it that maybe I'm missing, or what is it that I'm maybe zeroed in on and a little bit myopically focused, that I'm missing a bigger picture somewhere else? So it gives the opportunity for some interesting conversations to really level set and help people come alongside to relieve some of that stress. Still very stressful, still one of those things that's going to be probably for the foreseeable future a challenge for us to have to figure out how do we help our employees and ourselves not go home and self-medicate? There's a lot of things that I hear people talking about, it's just unhealthy actions that we take because of the stress.
Makes a lot of sense. So to sum it up, I just want to kind of put like a punchline. If we were to put in a quote, for example, so it's basically one, communicating with other business leaders and senior management that cybersecurity is a team sport.
Mhm.
And it's everyone else's responsibility to play their part, whether it's educating their own people in their own team, because if someone clicks on this link to open some attachment that compromises the whole company, it's kind of on them just as much as it is on CISO, right? So number one, and number two, communicating extremely clearly that in this business there are no guarantees. We deal with not being a low-hanging fruit, not being an easy target. However, again, with sufficient resources, just about anything can be breached. So we're closing all the doors, we're pulling all the gates, we're making sure that no roundabout ways are open. But if someone is gonna just storm the castle from the front gate with brutal force of magnitude that just essentially like a government, state, or an enterprise organization that is incredibly resourced, there's only so much we can do, so that at least there's understanding that on a personal level, on a organizational level, it's not the CISO. The CISO can only do so much given the resources, given the team, and given the time frame.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think something that you asked about a minute ago is, just because we got the security budget cut doesn't mean the company doesn't care about security, because they probably also cut the marketing budget and they cut somebody else. And we have to live within the reality of we're being asked to do more with less. That does add to stress, but if we can bring other people to bear with it, I think we can get there. Focusing on the right work, making sure that we're doing things that really truly move the security needle, not just check a box somewhere. Makes
a lot of sense. Randy, I think we only covered a handful of questions, so we may have to do a part 2 sometime in the future. As we're getting close to the end of the hour, where can people find you? What's the best way to connect?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I've had an enjoyable conversation and thinking about all these things. You can find me. I've got a personal website, randyraw.com. It's RAW. I've got some resources on there for leaders if they're interested in that. They can find my email address. There's a contact me link that's on there. I have a Twitter account, but I just follow people. I don't tweet very often. And then LinkedIn is another place where I have content that's out there and am relatively active from a social media standpoint of at least cleaning up the invitations and responding to people that are there.
Excellent. Randy, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.